The billionaire everyone feared brought his empire's arrogance into a place he couldn't control, a hospital ward. She was just a single mother working the desk, carrying her own scars, her own quiet wars. No one dared stand in his way, until she did. What began as defiance became something neither of them expected. But when betrayal shattered their fragile bond, the only question left was, would love be strong enough to rebuild what had broken? At the hospital desk, she told the man with everything no. And he listened. But power, pride, and secrets never stay buried for long. When their worlds shatter, who risks rebuilding first? Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're ready to dive into today's story, make sure to hit subscribe and share in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing our community come together from all around the world. And remember, tomorrow I'll be back with another story just as captivating, so don't miss it. Now, let's begin. The morning rush at St. Clair's Hospital was a cacophony of beeping monitors, wheeled gurneys, and clipped voices. Behind the admitting desk, Clara Jennings steadied her breath, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she registered patients faster than the printer could spit out forms. Her badge was crooked, her bun was slipping. She hadn't slept properly in weeks, but exhaustion was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every minute she spent here was a minute she wasn't at home with her son, Daniel, 8 years old, sweet-tempered, and fragile in ways other children weren't. His asthma attacks could escalate without warning, which meant Clara had to be both provider and protector, often in the same breath. She smiled automatically at the older woman approaching the desk, soothing her confusion with patience. But when she turned away, the smile crumbled like wet paper. Clara's flaw wasn't lack of compassion, it was that she gave it away to everyone except herself. The weight of bills, night shifts, and Daniel's school calls pressed down so heavily that sometimes she forgot what her own laughter sounded like. "Jennings, you're on double tonight," called her supervisor, dropping a chart on the counter. Clara blinked. But she wanted to say Daniel had an appointment, that she couldn't leave him with a sitter for another 12-hour stretch. But her supervisor was already halfway down the hall. Words unsaid lodged in her throat, bitter as aspirin. She tucked the chart under her arm and swallowed her protest. Strength, she reminded herself, meant never breaking where her son could see. 3 floors up, in a private wing shielded from a hospital's chaos, Dominic Hale sat in a leather chair worth more than most people's cars. His suit, navy and tailored, fit like armor. The world saw him as ruthless efficiency personified, a billionaire whose real estate empire spanned continents, whose handshake could alter skylines. But inside, irritation seethed. Hospitals were the one place he despised. He had built towers of glass and steel, but here he was reminded that nothing, not money, not power, could stop a heart from failing or a lung from collapsing. His father had died in a hospital bed years ago, stubbornly refusing every gesture of comfort. Dominic had learned then that control was everything, and vulnerability was a liability he would never allow again. "Mr. Hale," said his assistant, hovering with an iPad. "Your meeting with the board has been pushed, but the doctor still needs signatures before your mother's discharge." Dominic's jaw tightened. His mother, Eleanor Hale, had slipped and fractured her hip. A simple accident, yet it disrupted his empire for 2 weeks. Staff here bent under his glare, cleared corridors at his approach, and spoke in whispers once he passed. He didn't mind. Fear was easier than pity. "I'll sign what needs signing," he said, rising. "Then I'm done with this place." By late afternoon, Clara's head throbbed from fluorescent lights. Her phone buzzed in her scrub pocket. Daniel's inhaler is running low. The sitter's text made her throat constrict. She checked her watch. 2 hours until she could leave, if no emergencies came in. Her coworkers teased her sometimes, called her Fortress Mom because she rarely joined their drinks after shifts, never flirted with doctors, never asked for help. They didn't know that behind her fortress was a fear that if she let one brick slip, her whole fragile life would collapse. She rubbed her temple and whispered, "Just hold on, Danny. Mommy's almost there." Dominic stalked into the admissions wing with his assistant trailing. The automatic doors hissed open, and conversations died mid-sentence. Nurses straightened. Clerks looked down. He commanded silence without asking for it. At the counter, Clara glanced up, and every other staff member suddenly found an excuse to step back. She caught the ripple of avoidance like a wave, realizing they were leaving her exposed to him. Dominic Hale. She recognized him instantly. His face was everywhere, Forbes covers, charity galas, business news channels. He was taller in person, his presence sharp as cut glass. He placed a stack of papers on the desk with a thud. "I need these processed. Now." His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of someone unaccustomed to waiting. Clara's fingers stilled on the keyboard. Exhaustion begged her to keep her head down, comply like the others. But something in his entitlement lit a spark of rebellion she usually buried. "Sir," she said evenly, "there are 3 patients ahead of you in the queue. I'll process yours in turn." The air thickened. His assistant shifted nervously. Staff at nearby desks pretended not to listen while listening to every syllable. Dominic arched an eyebrow, his expression halfway between disbelief and annoyance. "Do you know who I am?" Clara met his gaze, steady, unflinching. "Yes. And I know who they are." She nodded toward the waiting patients. They came first. For the first time all day, Dominic's composure faltered, just for a heartbeat. The hospital's fluorescent hum filled the silence. One billionaire, used to obedience, had met a woman who refused to bend. One single mother, used to swallowing her voice, had finally let it out. Neither realized it yet, but the collision of their worlds had just begun. Would you stand firm like Clara when power tries to silence you, or would fear make you step aside? The desk between them became more than polished laminate, it was a battlefield. Dominic Hale's hand rested on the papers, long fingers splayed as though pinning them in place. His eyes, storm gray and sharp, locked on Clara's steady gaze. Around them, the hospital's constant rhythm faltered. The printer stuttered to a halt. A nurse fumbled with her clipboard. Even the beeping monitor at triage seemed to hesitate. The staff were holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable eruption. But Clara didn't flinch. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself in the scent of antiseptic and faint coffee. She'd faced nights when Daniel couldn't breathe, when every wheeze was a knife of panic in her chest. Compared to that, one arrogant billionaire was just noise. "Sir," she repeated, quieter now, "you'll need to wait." The firmness in her voice wasn't a shout, it was steadier than steel. Dominic's lips curved, not into a smile but a smirk edged with disbelief. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Most people know better than to make me wait." Clara's pulse raced, but she didn't look away. Then most people must not be doing their jobs properly. It was reckless. She knew it. Her supervisor would flay her alive if word spread that she'd spoken to him this way. But something inside her refused to shrink. She'd been overlooked, brushed aside, taken for granted too many times. This moment was hers. A low chuckle rumbled from Dominic's chest, though it held no humor. His assistant shifted uncomfortably, whispering, "Sir, maybe we should." Dominic silenced him with a glance. Then he straightened, the leather of his watchband creaking as he adjusted his cuff. "Very well. I'll wait. But not for long." When he stepped back, the staff collectively exhaled. The tension that had hung in the air shattered like glass. Clara felt her own lungs fill, shaky but victorious. She returned to the keyboard, her hands trembling slightly, determined not to let it show. The man had power, money, influence, but she had dignity. And for once, she hadn't let fear trade it away. Across the waiting room, a little boy with a teddy bear waved at her. She smiled back, heart softening. Moments like that reminded her why she stayed, why she endured the double shifts, the exhaustion. Humanity mattered more than hierarchy. But out of the corner of her eye, she caught Dominic watching her. Not with the usual cold detachment he wore like armor. No, this was different. Curious. Measuring. As though he couldn't quite decide whether to be impressed or irritated. Dominic sat in a chair by the wall, his posture impeccable despite the plastic's discomfort. His phone buzzed relentlessly, but he ignored it. Instead, his gaze drifted back to the woman at the desk. She wasn't striking in the conventional sense. Her hair had escaped its bun, tendrils clinging to damp skin. Her scrubs were wrinkled. And yet, when she spoke to the next patient, her voice gentled, her face softening in ways he couldn't remember seeing in years. She had defied him. No one defied him. And rather than dismiss her as foolish, he found himself unsettled by the memory of her steady eyes. For the first time in a long time, someone had seen through his bluster and refused to yield. He wasn't sure if he hated it, or needed more of it. Clara's shift crawled forward, each keystroke echoing in her skull. Her heart still thrummed with leftover adrenaline, her palms damp. She wasn't reckless by nature. Every choice in her life was calculated around survival, security, her son. But today she had chosen pride. When she dared glance at the billionaire again, he was still seated. Still watching. She forced her gaze back to the computer screen, cheeks warming. "Don't think about him," she scolded herself. "He's nothing to you. Just a man who thinks money makes him the center of the universe." Yet her body betrayed her with every shaky breath. As the line thinned, Dominic finally rose. His steps were measured, his shadow stretching across the desk before him. Clara's pulse jumped as he stopped in front of her again, sliding the papers forward without a word. This time, she processed them. Not quickly, deliberately. Each keystroke echoed like a gavel. When she slid the documents back across the counter, their fingers almost brushed. The fleeting contact was nothing more than static, but it jolted through her like a spark. Dominic's gaze dipped to her hand, then back to her eyes. Something unreadable flickered there, gone as quickly as it came. "Efficient," he said finally. A single word, flat, but laced with the faintest thread of respect. Then he was gone, his assistant trailing like a shadow. When the doors shut behind him, Clara sagged against her chair. The staff began whispering, their relief spilling into nervous laughter. "You're insane," muttered one nurse. "Do you have any idea who that was?" "Yes," Clara whispered, more to herself than anyone. "I do." But in the quiet space left behind, she also realized something else. She wasn't just rattled. She was curious. And that scared her more than his arrogance ever could. For Dominic, it had been a test of power he didn't win. For Clara, it was a test of courage she hadn't expected to pass. Neither admitted it aloud, but the spark between them had been struck, tiny, dangerous, impossible to ignore. And sparks, once lit, rarely stay contained. The next morning, Clara stirred sugar into her coffee with more force than necessary, the plastic stirrer nearly snapping in her grip. It had been just one moment, a clash at the admissions desk. She shouldn't still be thinking about it. Yet she was. Her best friend at work, Janice, leaned against the vending machine, watching her with narrowed eyes. "You're awfully quiet today." Clara shrugged. "Double shifts will do that to you." Janice wasn't buying it. "Word in the break room is you stared down Dominic Hale yesterday." The Dominic Hale. And lived to tell about it. Clara groaned, covering her face. "Great. Just what I need, rumors." "Oh please," Janice teased. "You're officially the hospital hero. People are saying you made him wait like a regular mortal." Clara pressed her palms to her temples. "He's just a man, January. A rude, arrogant man who happened to show up on my shift. That's it." But her voice wavered at just. Across town, Dominic Hale sat at the head of a polished oak conference table, the city skyline glittering behind him. His board of directors droned about projections, investments, market forecasts. He should have been focused. He wasn't. The memory of the woman's defiance kept intruding, her steady gaze, her refusal to yield. "Mr. Hale," one of the executives ventured. Dominic blinked. "Yes. Proceed." After the meeting, his assistant, Leonard, approached cautiously. "Sir, forgive me, but you've been distracted since the hospital." Dominic shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Distracted?" Leonard hesitated. "It's just, you've mentioned the admissions clerk twice." "I don't mention clerks." Dominic snapped his briefcase shut. "I mention inefficiency." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. He wasn't irritated at inefficiency. He was irritated at the fact she had made him wait, and that he didn't entirely regret it. At St. Clair's, whispers followed Clara down the hall. A few colleagues high-fived her, calling her brave. Others muttered that she was foolish to risk her job. During lunch, her supervisor cornered her. "I don't know what possessed you yesterday, Jennings," the woman hissed, "but you can't speak to donors like that. The Hale Foundation funds half our cardiac wing." Clara's stomach dropped. She hadn't considered that side of things. "I wasn't disrespectful. I was fair." Fair doesn't pay salaries. Next time, remember where your paycheck comes from. The words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She swallowed her pride and nodded, though inside, rebellion smoldered. Why was dignity always a luxury reserved for the wealthy? Fate, however, wasn't done with her. 3 days later, Clara left her shift late, her body heavy with fatigue. As she stepped into the hospital parking lot, a sleek black car idled near the curb. Its tinted window rolled down, revealing the last face she wanted to see. Dominic Hale. "Ms. Jennings," he said smoothly, his tone somewhere between greeting and command. Her spine stiffened. "Mr. Hale. If you're here to file a complaint, please take it to administration." A flicker of amusement touched his mouth. "Not a complaint. An observation." She folded her arms. "I don't have time for observations." "Make time." The words sparked a flash of anger in her chest. She was too tired, too stretched thin to indulge his arrogance. "Some of us don't have drivers waiting at curbs. I have a son at home who needs dinner. Excuse me." She walked past without looking back. Dominic's gaze followed her, unreadable. Later that evening, Dominic sat alone in his penthouse, a glass of scotch untouched at his side. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city shimmered, but it only highlighted the hollowness inside. Why had he gone back to the hospital? Why had he waited outside like some supplicant? He never chased people. People came to him. He told himself it was irritation. Curiosity. Nothing more. Yet when he pictured her walking away, tired but unbowed, something tightened in his chest he couldn't quite name. "Ridiculous," he muttered aloud. "She's a clerk. Nothing more." But the empty apartment didn't argue back. Back at her modest apartment, Clara reheated pasta while Daniel recited multiplication tables at the kitchen table. She forced herself to focus on him, on the steady rhythm of his small voice, the warmth of normalcy. But when he asked, "Mom, why are you smiling like that?" she startled. "I'm not smiling." "Yes, you are. Like when you beat me at Uno." Clara flushed, stirring the pasta with unnecessary vigor. She wasn't smiling at all, she told herself. And if she was, it had nothing to do with a billionaire who thought the world owed him obedience. Still, her son's observation gnawed at her. Days passed. Dominic buried himself in meetings, contracts, empire building. Clara buried herself in patience, paperwork, and mothering. Both told themselves the same lie: it meant nothing. And yet, when Dominic's car passed the hospital one evening, he slowed without meaning to, eyes flicking toward the glowing windows. When Clara sorted paperwork, she paused every time the name Hale appeared on a donation form. Resistance had taken root, but resistance, when fed by denial, has a way of deepening attachment instead of breaking it. He convinced himself she was insolent, a distraction. She convinced herself he was arrogant, irrelevant. But their denials rang hollow, echoing louder each day. The collision hadn't ended at the desk, it had only begun to smolder. The stage was set for circumstances to force them closer than either dared imagine. It was just past midnight when the hospital's quiet hum cracked open with the wail of sirens. Clara jerked her head up from her paperwork as paramedics burst through the automatic doors, wheeling in a stretcher. A woman lay pale against the white sheets, her hip immobilized. Clara's heart sank, she recognized her instantly. Eleanor Hale. Dominic strode in seconds later, his presence dark and commanding, his eyes flicking across the room until they landed on Clara. Her chest tightened. Of all the people to be on duty tonight. She slipped again, one paramedic explained. Blood pressure dropped in the ambulance. We need her admitted fast. Clara's hands moved automatically, steadying papers, confirming vitals, checking signatures. She could feel Dominic's gaze boring into her, the weight of his unspoken demand. Don't fail her. Hours passed in tense rhythm. Eleanor stabilized but needed observation. Dominic insisted on remaining close, refusing to leave her side. Hospital policy, however, meant family had to check in and be escorted. And who drew escort duty? Clara. Seriously, she muttered under her breath when her supervisor pulled her aside. You handled him before, came the dry reply. Consider it a talent. So Clara found herself walking Dominic through dim corridors, her clipboard clutched like a shield. He was too close, his suit brushing her sleeve, his cologne sharp and expensive, at odds with antiseptic air. You again, he said quietly. Unfortunately, she shot back. Not unfortunate for me. The word startled her, but his expression was unreadable. They ended up in the family waiting room, sterile couches, humming vending machines, fluorescent lights that bleached the night. Dominic sat stiffly, his jaw tight. Clara settled across from him, scribbling notes to avoid looking at him. Finally, he spoke. She hates hospitals. Clara looked up, surprised at the admission. Most people do. She's not most people. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. She used to be fearless. Now, she's fragile. Clara caught the flicker in his eyes. Worry, guilt, something raw. For the first time, he didn't look untouchable. He looked human. She's lucky you're here, Clara said before she could stop herself. He gave a humorless laugh. She wouldn't say that. The clock ticked. The vending machine buzzed. Clara tapped her pen against her clipboard. Dominic finally leaned forward. You think I'm insufferable? Her brows shot up. That obvious? Painfully. She bit her lip, caught between honesty and caution. You treat people like they're obstacles, not people. His eyes narrowed, but not with anger, with thought. And you treat people like they're all worth saving, even when they're not. The words stung, yet beneath them she heard something else, envy. Her voice was steady when she answered. That's the difference between us, Mr. Hale. I can't afford not to care. A nurse entered. Mrs. Hale needs another scan in 30 minutes. If her blood pressure doesn't stabilize, she'll need surgery. Dominic's composure cracked for a heartbeat. Clara saw his knuckles whiten, his gaze dart to the clock. She recognized the helplessness in his expression, the same helplessness she felt every time Daniel struggled for breath. For once, their worlds overlapped. You can't control this, she said softly. His head snapped toward her, eyes sharp, defensive. Control is the only thing that works. Not here. Not tonight. The silence that followed was heavier than words. As they waited, Clara's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, Daniel's sitter checking in. Relief washed through her, but she felt Dominic's gaze linger. You have a child. It wasn't a question. She hesitated, then nodded. Daniel. 8. Smart as they come. Something unreadable flickered in his expression. Curiosity. Maybe respect. And his father? Clara's jaw tightened. Not part of the picture. Dominic studied her, his face shadowed by the fluorescent light. He didn't press. And that restraint unsettled her more than any arrogance had. The nurse returned with news. Eleanor's pressure was stable. No surgery, for now. Relief sagged Clara's shoulders. To her surprise, Dominic released a breath too, one hand dragging across his face. The gesture was tired, unguarded, human. Clara saw him differently then, not as the billionaire who thought rules bent for him, but as a son afraid of losing his mother. You should rest, she said gently. He looked at her, eyes shadowed, voice low. I don't remember the last time I rested. And for the first time, she believed him. The night trapped them together in fluorescent light and silence. Neither wanted to be there, yet neither could walk away. In the waiting room's fragile stillness, the first threads of vulnerability slipped through the cracks in their armor. The clock was still ticking, on Eleanor's health, on Clara's resolve, on Dominic's defenses. By dawn, Eleanor was resting comfortably in her room. Dominic stood at the foot of her bed, his suit rumpled, his tie loosened, an image Clara never thought she'd see. Clara updated the chart, careful not to intrude, but her eyes kept flicking to him. He hadn't left his mother's side once. He looked exhausted, but there was a stubbornness in the set of his shoulders, a refusal to admit weakness. When he finally turned, their gazes collided. For a beat, neither spoke. Then he gestured toward the hallway. Walk with me. It wasn't a command this time. It was a request. They ended up in a quiet alcove near the east wing, where floor-to-ceiling windows poured in the pale light of morning. Dominic leaned against the glass, eyes fixed on the skyline. My father died in a place like this, he said without preamble. His voice was low, controlled, but beneath it, pain pulsed. Heart attack. He refused to slow down, refused to listen to doctors. By the time he collapsed, it was too late. Clara softened, sensing the crack in his armor. I'm sorry. He gave a short laugh, bitter. Don't be. He wasn't the kind of man who earned sympathy. Cold. Distant. He taught me one lesson: weakness is fatal. If you want to survive, you don't bend. You control. His eyes flicked to hers, sharp again. So yes, I am arrogant. Yes, I expect the world to move at my pace. Because if I stop, if I wait, his voice caught for the briefest moment. People die. Clara's chest tightened. She hadn't expected this rawness, this glimpse of the man behind the headlines. She took a slow breath, her own walls pressing against her ribs. I know what it's like to lose someone, too. He studied her, silent, waiting. My son's father, she began, voice rough. When I told him I was pregnant, he said he wasn't ready for responsibility. He left before Daniel was born. Said I was on my own. Her throat tightened, but she pressed on. Since then, I've had to be everything: provider, parent, protector. Some days I can't even breathe from the weight of it. But I keep going. Because I don't have the luxury of collapsing. Dominic's eyes darkened, not with judgment but with something that looked alarmingly like respect. You did all of that. Alone. Yes. Her chin lifted. And I'll keep doing it. Because he deserves better than abandonment. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Dominic saw it then, the same relentless drive in her that lived in him. But where his came from fear of weakness, hers came from love. They were two sides of the same coin, both scarred, both carrying more than they should. You think strength means control, Clara said softly. But sometimes it means letting someone else in. And you think love can fix everything. His gaze held hers, steady. But love didn't keep your son's father from walking away. The words should have cut, but instead they rang with brutal honesty. Maybe not, Clara admitted. But love is the only reason I keep standing. Something shifted in his expression, an almost imperceptible softening. For once, Dominic didn't have a retort. Instead he asked, "What's he like?" "Your son." Clara blinked, caught off guard. No one at work ever asked. Daniel? He's stubborn. Brilliant. Loves building Lego towers taller than he is. Asthma slows him down, but it doesn't stop him. He wants to be an astronaut. Dominic's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. Ambitious. Wonder where he gets that from, Clara said wryly. Their eyes met again, and for the first time, the tension between them wasn't about defiance or pride. It was something quieter. Warmer. Dangerous. A nurse appeared, interrupting the moment. Mr. Hale, your mother's asking for you. Dominic straightened immediately, the steel sliding back into place. Of course. But before he turned away, his gaze lingered on Clara, long enough to leave a pulse of heat in her chest. When he was gone, Clara leaned back against the wall, breath shaky. She told herself it didn't matter, that she had no business feeling this way. And yet, for the first time in years, someone had seen her not just as a mother, not just as staff, but as a woman. Two stories had been laid bare, his built on control to outrun grief, hers built on resilience to outrun abandonment. For the first time, they stood not as billionaire and clerk, but as two fractured souls mirroring each other in the quiet light of dawn. And once wounds are revealed, bonds are no longer so easily ignored. Eleanor's condition stabilized over the next few days. Dominic became a fixture at the hospital, a sharp suit against whitewashed walls. Staff tiptoed around him, except Clara. One evening, as Clara logged patient notes at the desk, Dominic approached with 2 coffees in hand. She blinked, suspicious. "This isn't a bribe," he said, setting 1 cup beside her. Her brows arched. "You trying to prove you're human?" "Perhaps." His tone was dry, but there was the faintest glint in his eyes. Against her better judgment, she took a sip. It was exactly how she liked it, 1 sugar, no cream. The detail startled her. "How did you?" "I observe," he said simply. Clara shook her head, fighting a smile. "Maybe you should use those powers for good instead of intimidation." "Maybe," he allowed. For the first time, their conversation ended without sparks flying, except the quiet kind that lingered between their glances. Later that night, Clara checked on Eleanor, who was propped up in bed, fussing with her blanket. Dominic sat nearby, scrolling through emails with practiced detachment. "Your son hovers worse than the nurses," Eleanor told Clara, rolling her eyes affectionately. Dominic looked up, indignant. "I'm making sure you're cared for. You're making sure I don't escape." Eleanor smirked. "When I'm perfectly capable of walking to the cafeteria." "You're on bed rest," he countered. "Bossy." She waved a dismissive hand, then turned to Clara. "Tell him to stop policing me." Clara bit back a laugh, covering her mouth with her chart. "She's right. You're a bit of a tyrant." Dominic's eyes narrowed, but the corners of his mouth twitched. "I don't recall asking for a united front." Clara finally laughed, an unguarded ringing sound that filled the sterile room. Even Eleanor chuckled. Dominic stared at her for a moment too long, something unfamiliar warming his expression. It had been years since Clara laughed like that. She hadn't realized how much she missed it until now. A few nights later, Clara stepped outside during her break. The hospital courtyard was quiet, lit by dim lamps and the distant glow of the city. She hugged her jacket tighter against the chill. Footsteps echoed behind her. "Dominic. You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. She arched a brow. "Are you always this overbearing?" "Always." But his voice lacked bite. They stood in silence for a moment, the night air heavy with unsaid things. Finally, Clara exhaled. "Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning." He glanced at her sharply. "With work, bills, Daniel's health. I keep telling myself I'm strong enough, but..." Her throat tightened. "Some nights I wonder how much longer I can hold it all together." Her honesty startled even herself. She'd never said it out loud, not to Janice, not to anyone. Dominic's face softened in a way she hadn't seen before. "I know that feeling." She turned toward him, surprised. "When my father died," he said quietly, "I buried myself in building an empire. I thought if I kept climbing, I'd outrun the emptiness. But no matter how high I built, it followed me. Strength without rest, without connection, it's just another cage." Clara's chest ached at the rawness in his voice. "You're not drowning," he added, his gaze steady on hers. "You're carrying more than anyone should. And you're still standing. That's not weakness, Clara. That's extraordinary." Her breath caught. No one had ever said that to her, not once. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it pulsed. Clara felt the air shift, the space between them charged. His gaze dipped briefly to her lips before he pulled it back, jaw tightening. Her pulse thundered. She should step away, remind herself who he was, arrogant, impossible, untouchable. Instead, she stayed rooted, caught in the gravity between them. It was Eleanor's call button that broke the spell, echoing faintly from inside. Clara startled, stepping back. Dominic straightened too, composure snapping back into place. But something had already changed. Humor had cracked their walls. Confession had thinned them. And now, with every glance, every silence, every unguarded smile, they teetered closer to something neither had expected or prepared for. It was no longer a question of if their defenses would break. Only when. 4 days, the fragile thread between Clara and Dominic held. They danced around it in stolen glances, softened words, and late-night conversations. Even Eleanor noticed. "You've put some color back in her cheeks," Eleanor teased Clara one morning, gesturing toward her son. Dominic had glared, but Clara saw the faint flush behind his composure. It almost felt safe. Until the day everything cracked. Clara had just finished her shift when she overheard 2 nurses whispering in the break room. "Hale's lawyers are drafting a new contract with the hospital board. Cutting costs, from what I heard, might mean staff reductions. Wouldn't surprise me. Billionaires don't get rich by caring about people." Clara froze. Staff reductions. Fear curled in her stomach. Her son's inhalers, his school fees, the roof over their heads, it all depended on her job. And the man who'd spent the last week peeling back her defenses? He was the same man pulling strings to threaten it. Her chest went cold. She found him in Eleanor's room later, phone pressed to his ear, voice clipped. "I don't care how the board feels. Push it through. Efficiency matters more than sentiment." Clara's breath caught. The words were knives. When he ended the call, she spoke, her voice shaking. Efficiency? Is that what you call people's livelihoods? Efficiency. Dominic turned, startled. Clara. Don't. Her eyes burned. I should have known better. All your speeches about connection, about cages, it's just talk. You don't care about anyone but yourself. Something like panic flickered in his eyes. It's not what you think. Then what is it? She demanded. Because it sounds like the Dominic Hale everyone warned me about. Ruthless. Heartless. Untouchable. His jaw tightened, his pride rearing. You don't understand what's at stake. And you don't understand what it means to fight for someone other than yourself. The silence that followed was thick, jagged. Eleanor stirred in bed, sensing the tension, but neither of them moved. That night, Clara returned home and found Daniel's Lego tower toppled across the floor, blocks scattered in every direction. He looked up at her, sheepish. It broke when I tried to make it taller. Clara knelt, helping him gather pieces, but her vision blurred. The broken tower felt like a mirror of her chest, something fragile she dared to build, only to watch it collapse. Daniel asked softly, "Are you sad, Mom?" She forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Towers fall sometimes. We'll rebuild." But inside, her heart whispered, "Not this one." Back in his penthouse, Dominic poured a drink he didn't touch. The glass trembled in his hand. He had seen the betrayal in Clara's eyes, felt the wall slam back into place between them. And the worst part? He hadn't been able to stop it. The contract wasn't just numbers, it was survival for his empire. If the deal fell through, hundreds of jobs across his companies would be at risk. But how could he explain that to her without sounding like the tyrant she already believed him to be? He slammed the glass against the counter. It shattered, amber liquid spilling across marble. The shards glittered in the city lights, like his carefully constructed world, fractured and bleeding. The next day, Eleanor caught her son pacing by her bed, tension etched into every line of him. "Dominic," she said softly, "don't lose her." His head snapped toward her. "You don't know what you're talking about. I see the way you look at her. She makes you more human than you've been in years." Eleanor's voice cracked with emotion. "Don't let your father's ghost dictate every choice you make." Dominic swallowed hard, but the words only tightened the vice around his chest. He didn't know how to choose between the empire he built and the woman who had slipped past his defenses. Clara avoided him after that. At the desk, she turned away. In the halls, she walked in the opposite direction. Every time their eyes met, it was a collision of longing and anger, of words unsaid. He tried to approach once, but she cut him off with a cold "don't." The finality in her tone gutted him more than he expected. For Clara, the hurt ran deeper than anger. She had allowed herself to hope, to trust, to believe there was more to him. And hope betrayed hurt worst of all. The bond they had nurtured with laughter, confession, and fragile vulnerability lay in ruins. She saw him as ruthless. He saw her as unreachable. The spark that once lit possibility now burned as ash. The shatterpoint had come, and neither knew if what broke could ever be rebuilt. The hospital corridors were quieter than usual that night. Clara sat in the staff lounge, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm tea. She stared into the steam as if it held answers. Janice slipped in, dropping her bag on a chair. "You look like you're carrying the world." Clara gave a humorless laugh. "Feels about right." Janice sat beside her. "This is about him, isn't it?" Clara's silence was enough of an answer. "Clara, I've seen the way he looks at you. That man is breaking himself open for you." Clara shook her head, bitterness rising. "And still closing contracts that put people like me on the chopping block. I can't risk believing in someone like him. Daniel needs stability, not heartbreak." But even as she spoke the words, her chest ached. Because stability without love felt like half a life. High above the city, Dominic sat in his glass-walled penthouse, the skyline glittering beyond him. Yet for the first time, the view felt like a cage instead of a triumph. He'd built everything to prove he wasn't weak, to silence his father's ghost. And in the process, he'd driven away the only woman who saw him as more than a name on Forbes. Eleanor's words haunted him, "Don't lose her." But how could he give Clara what she wanted without tearing apart the empire he had sacrificed his soul to build? He loosened his tie, staring at his reflection in the window. For the first time, he wondered if all this glass and steel had been worth it. What was the point of surviving if it meant surviving alone? At home, Clara tucked Daniel into bed. He clutched his inhaler under the blanket, just in case. "Mom," he asked drowsily, "why were you sad this week?" Her throat tightened. "I wasn't sad, sweetheart. Just tired." Daniel blinked at her with wide, knowing eyes. "You should laugh more. You sound different when you laugh. Like you're lighter." Clara kissed his forehead, heart splintering. Out of the mouths of children came truths she couldn't ignore. She wanted that lightness again. She wanted to believe. But belief had cost her before. Could she afford it now? Back at the hospital, Dominic sat by his mother's bed. Eleanor reached for his hand, her frail fingers surprisingly strong. "Dominic," she whispered, "you think strength means never bending. But the strongest trees are the ones that sway with the wind. The rigid ones snap." He swallowed hard. "Your father taught you fear. Don't let him teach you your future, too." Eleanor's eyes softened. "If that girl makes you feel human again, fight for her. Fight the way you fight for your empire. Only this time, fight to stay, not to win." Her words pierced deeper than any boardroom battle ever had. That night, Clara sat at her kitchen table, bills spread out before her, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. She traced Daniel's Lego tower with her fingers, rebuilt piece by piece. She thought of Dominic's words in the courtyard, "Strength without rest is just another cage." She hated that he was right. She hated that she missed him. Across the city, Dominic paced his office, contracts stacked high on the desk. He thought of Clara's voice, sharp with hurt, "You don't understand what it means to fight for someone other than yourself." He hated that she was right. He hated that he missed her. Two souls in different rooms, circling the same truth. They couldn't keep going as they were. Morning light spilled across Clara's kitchen. Daniel was still asleep. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a message from Janice, "Board meeting today. Staff cuts might be finalized." Clara's heart sank. If Dominic really pushed this through, everything she feared would come true. She grabbed her bag, determination in her steps. She couldn't keep avoiding him. She had to know, once and for all, who he truly was. Meanwhile, Dominic stood in a boardroom filled with polished suits and sharper smiles. Contracts lay on the table. Every eye waited for his approval. "Sign it, Hale," one executive urged. He stared at the pen, at the papers, at everything he had fought for. Then he heard his mother's voice in his head, soft but unwavering, "Don't lose her." Dominic set the pen down. "No." Gasps rippled through the room. He looked each man in the eye. "This deal sacrifices the people who keep this place alive. If efficiency means gutting livelihoods, then it's not efficiency, it's cowardice. Rewrite it." The room buzzed with protest, but Dominic didn't flinch. For the first time, he chose vulnerability over control. At the same moment Clara walked into the hospital, bracing herself to confront him, Dominic walked out of his boardroom, having just taken the biggest risk of his life. Two choices, made in parallel. Two lives about to collide again. The air crackled with suspense. Whatever happened next would either mend what broke, or end it for good. Clara arrived at the hospital with her heart pounding. She'd rehearsed her speech in the car, sharp words about betrayal, about Daniel's future, about how she couldn't risk being foolish again. But when she stepped through the sliding doors, she saw him. Dominic Hale, suit rumpled, eyes shadowed, moving down the corridor with uncharacteristic urgency. He looked different. Not untouchable. Not ruthless. Human. Their gazes locked. The air between them thickened. "Clara," he breathed, stopping in front of her. Her carefully built wall wavered. "Don't." "I need you to hear me first," he said, voice rough. "Please." The word please disarmed her. They stepped into the quiet chapel tucked at the edge of the hospital, where the smell of polished wood and faint candle wax lingered. Clara folded her arms, bracing herself. Dominic faced her, no boardroom mask, no armor. "You were right. About me. I've built everything on control. On fear. But yesterday, I told the board no." Clara blinked. No. I refuse the contract. I won't sacrifice the people who keep this place running. If that means my empire cracks, so be it. His eyes held hers, unwavering. Because for the first time in years, I found something I can't afford to lose. Her breath caught. Dominic. You. His voice broke on the word. You and Daniel. You make me want to be more than survival. You make me want to live. Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But scars ran deep. You can't just undo years of damage with a speech, she whispered. I know. His expression softened. So let me prove it. Not with words. With choices. A week later, Clara cautiously agreed to let Dominic meet Daniel. They sat in her small living room, Lego bricks scattered across the rug. Daniel eyed Dominic curiously. You're the man who makes Mom mad, huh? Clara nearly choked. Dominic's mouth twitched. Guilty. Daniel squinted. Do you know how to build? He shoved a pile of blocks toward him. We're making a rocket. Dominic loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and sat cross-legged on the floor. Show me. Clara watched, astonished, as her son bossed the billionaire around like an apprentice engineer. When Dominic accidentally knocked over a tower, Daniel laughed so hard he wheezed, grabbing his inhaler. Dominic froze, concern flickering, but Clara nodded reassurance. He's okay. He knows what to do. Dominic studied Daniel, something tender settling in his expression. Then he glanced at Clara, eyes saying what words couldn't. I see him. I see you. Her chest ached, but this time it wasn't from fear. Back at the hospital, Eleanor grew stronger by the day. She insisted on walking the corridor with Clara, her arm looped through hers. You've changed him, Eleanor said softly. Clara shook her head. He changed himself. Because of you. Eleanor's eyes glistened. I've watched my son build walls higher than skyscrapers. But when you're near, I see the boy he used to be, the boy who still knew how to love. Clara's throat thickened. I don't know if I'm ready. Then don't be ready, Eleanor said firmly. Just be willing. Days later, Clara walked into her shift and froze. A notice board near the entrance, once covered in budget cut rumors, now displayed an official memo. No staff reductions. Hospital funding increased through the Hale Foundation. Her heart lurched. Dominic appeared beside her, hands in his pockets trying, and failing, to look casual. Told you I'd prove it. Clara's voice trembled. You did this. He nodded. It won't solve everything, but it's a start. For them. For us. Tears stung her eyes. This wasn't just words. This was change, tangible and real. That night, Clara found him in the courtyard where their first raw confession had happened. Cool autumn air brushed her cheeks as she approached. You scare me, she admitted. Dominic frowned. Why? Because if I let you in and you walk away, I don't know if I'll survive it. He stepped closer, his voice low and certain. Clara, I'm not walking away. Not from you. Not from Daniel. I've been running my whole life. I'm done running. Her chest heaved. And if you break us? I won't, he whispered. Because losing you would be the one failure I could never recover from. For a moment, silence stretched, thick and trembling. Then Clara let herself breathe, and stepped into his arms. The embrace was fierce, desperate, healing. Two broken people fitting into each other's fractures. Weeks later, life found a new rhythm. Dominic split his time between boardrooms and Clara's modest apartment. Daniel took to him with surprising ease, crowning him assistant astronaut in their Lego missions. At the hospital, Clara noticed the staff walking lighter, whispers of gratitude trailing whenever Dominic's name appeared. One evening, Clara returned home to find Daniel asleep on the couch, Lego rocket completed at his side. Dominic had draped a blanket over him. Clara stood in the doorway, watching the two most important people in her life in the same room. Warmth swelled in her chest. You're staring, Dominic murmured. Maybe I like what I see, she replied softly. The rude billionaire and the weary single mother, two lives that should never have collided, had become a family forged in defiance of fear, grief, and pride. The Lego tower that once lay shattered now stood taller than ever, rebuilt with steadier hands and steadier hearts. Love, after all, wasn't about avoiding collapse. It was about choosing to rebuild. Together.
Thank you, my amazing family and friends, for watching the story right through to the end. If this one gripped you, the next story will blow you away. It's even more intriguing, emotional, and unforgettable. So go ahead and click the image on your screen now to watch it. And as always, thank you for being here with me.